Hello and welcome back to 5-Minute Materials. Today we're going to be looking at a new feature that was introduced in Unreal Engine 5.1, and it's called the Material Overlay. We're going to take a look at what this system encompasses, what it does, and also when it is a good idea to use this over, implementing something in the shader itself. So, we jump into our little scene here. You can see that we have a character. This is a character with a super complex material. Look at all these parameters. Wow, I'd hate to add yet another piece of code to it. So what we can do instead is use an overlay material to basically render the mesh twice, but with a different material each time. So in this case, I'm just adding a shader that creates an outline, like a procedural reverse hull toon outline shader. And you can see, as I go around it, it's still, outlined. And over here, we have just a pretty dodgy example effect of, some sort of debuff, or maybe it's like a cursor selection. Apologies for your eyeballs. How does one use the material overlay thingamajig? Well, if you click on any mesh in your scene, whether that's a static mesh or a scaling mesh, and you just search overlay, you'll see in the rendering section in advanced, there is the overlay material doodad. This also has a culling distance, so if I don't want this to bother rendering after like 1,000 units, then if I go here, bam, it disappeared. And that is distance-based, not camera space-based. Space-based. It's based. It is based. I don't even know what that fucking means. Now, if we did want to access this in a blueprint, all we would need to do is have a reference to, again, any mesh. All you need to do is drag a pin off, go overlay material, and then you can either get or set the overlay material. So, in this case, we would go, okay, we want to use, cell shading, outline, blah, 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 as the overlay material. So if you wanted to have an effect where you hover your mouse over, a unit or something, and it, flashes or like kind of highlights itself, and you wanted to do that with a material overlay effect, you would just do, on mouse over or on unit selected or something, set whichever material you had set up, and then when it's finished, you would just say set overlay material to none, which would clear it. Now we're going to take a look at the basics of setting up an overlay material. So if we just go to this material, let's just remove everything. Let's just grab a texture, and we're going to chuck that into the opacity mask. We're just going to get a cloud noise baked. Let's like make it brown so it looks like dirt or something. If we have a look at our character, you'll see that nothing is appearing, and that's because the order, because both the meshes are in the exact same spot, sometimes, the material won't appear over the top of the character. So what we'll need to do is get the vertex normal world space, and usually just plugging it straight into the world position offset is enough to kind of bring the material out from inside the mesh. So you can see now our character looks like they're covered in, mud or something. If you look really closely, you can see that this is actually being rendered 1 centimeter away from the character. So that's something that you should always consider when you are working with these material overlays, is that they do have to actually kind of come out from the mesh very slightly. Otherwise, you're going to get things like Z-fighting and, just wacky stuff like that. So when do we actually want to use the material overlay tool? Well, I would argue that anything that you think is a novel and temporary effect is suitable for a material overlay. So a good example would be a debuff. You do have to consider that this is getting rendered twice. It also is an extra draw call, and we cry when we hear that word. So I've set up this little material for just an example of like, you know, a temporary debuff on a character. This might just be, you know, defense lowered or speed lowered or whatever. Now, the reason that we do it in a material overlay is because if we look inside it, there's all of this extra shader code, and usually we would have to actually go to our character material and we would have to just stack this on top somewhere. And this would always be running in the background because shaders are stateless, and whether an effect is visible or not doesn't mean that it isn't being computed at all times. So that's kind of the main use of this material overlay doodad, is so that you can offload, you know, novel effects. You might only see them like once or twice on a character in an entire play session. So why put it in the character material if it's not actually going to be, you know, getting used very often? Now, while we're on the topic of novel effects, why not learn how to write a novel with the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare? Skillshare is your one-stop shop for learning absolutely any skill that exists upon the earth. Lately, I've been looking at expanding my writing and world-building capabilities, and I came across Lincoln Michelle's class, Science Fiction and Fantasy, Creating Unique and Powerful Worlds, which so far has been absolutely fantastic. And I think this skill in particular is very relevant to game design, because most of the time we are creating new and fantastic worlds for players to explore. So if you do want to support this channel and you also want to support the development of your own skills, then check out the link in the description of this video and receive 1 free month trial of Skillshare. So thank you once again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the material overlay system. Now, another benefit that this has over putting everything in, you know, the shaders themselves, is that you can just kind of, as the name suggests, overlay it over the top of literally any other material or mesh in the scene. You know, we can apply this effect to any other material. So this just means we don't have to, you know, if we have some kind of, you know, debuff effect or damage effect or whatever, we don't have to go into our props material and factor it in there. We don't have to put it into our character material and factor it in there. We don't have to put it in our foliage material and factor it in there. It's just, you know, overlaid over the top. Now, one thing that really annoys me is that the material overlay, and this obviously this might change in the future, and maybe this has changed by the time, you know, you're watching this video, but you can only have 1 overlay material at a time. And I think this is kind of a weird decision, even for the first iteration of it, because what this is doing under the hood is just getting that same, you know, mesh with a different material each time. So like, for example, if I just got this character material here and we just like put him right here, we've got 2 effects laid over the top of each other. Obviously this is triple the draw calls as usual. But again, if it was temporary, then this is kind of what we'd expect to be able to do. So why would we want extra slots and stuff? Well, basically, if we've got like a debuff on a character, but then we also want them to be like selected, like that little example that we just saw, we'd have to choose one or the other, which I don't like. So if any of the Unreal devs are listening, having X amount of slots and also being able to name the slots, so like to input a name or even just an index or something, so that you could just say, you know, set material overlay, this is the cursor tag, and give that, you know, the thing when it does the thing, and then be able to clear the cursor tag overlay material. Anyway, that's just a little side rant of mine, but hopefully in the future we'll be able to use multiple at once. So one thing that some people have been a bit confused about with the, you know, the overlay material, blah, 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 is how to actually set parameters on them at runtime. So if we look at our character, which I just turned into an empty blueprint, we can just have an event called damage taken. And, you know, this could come from anywhere. That's up to you to decide. What we will do is create dynamic material instance. New material 6, fantastic. And now we've actually created a dynamic material instance. We have a reference to it here, which we'll just set as, you know, overlay materials. And then we will get our character mesh, or whichever mesh, you know, we want to affect. Set overlay material. We yeet that into here. So now the overlay material is using a dynamic material instance, so like a runtime material instance. And then we can set parameters on this material. So we're just going to go when, you know, this character takes damage over 5 seconds, let's get this material. We're going to set a scalar parameter value called opacity. And the value is just going to go from 0 to 1 over 5 seconds. Is just here. Opacity, multiply. This is just before the dither. Opacity mask, blah, 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 blah. So if we now trace against our character, like that, you can see that the effect fades in over 5 seconds. Fantastic. Now, you can do this with, you know, any kind of parameter. You know, you could change the color of it at runtime. You could change the speed of it. You could, you know, based on how, you know, heavy the debuff is or something like that. And this would be the way that you do it. So 2 cool little bits of info about this system and you know, how it's working under the hood is that it will actually read the same vertex color data and the same custom data as the mesh that, you know, it's representing. So if we just get our, you know, funky little debuff effect on this wall, which has been vertex painted, and let's just set the color to be the vertex color, then we can actually see that the vertex color gets applied to both of the materials. So the main material and the overlay material. Usually this would be an issue if you were just duplicating, you know, the mesh. Have to somehow copy all of the vertex paint over, which could be a bit of a pain in the ass. Now, this also applies to custom data. So if you are a custom data enjoyer like me, then we can actually say, you know, if this was custom data, if we changed the custom data values on the mesh that we're overlaying the material on top of, it would change it on both the regular material and the overlay material, or both materials are pulling from the same mesh, which again, if we had a duplicate mesh, this wouldn't be the case. So just 2 little fun facts about how this is kind of working under the hood. Now, with this knowledge that custom data actually gets read from the primitive into the doodad, we could actually bypass needing to create a dynamic material instance, because we could just say set overlay material. What was it, like material 6 or some shit? There it is. And we could just get the mesh. We could set custom data, primitive data float on update, you know, lerp it from 0 to 1. So now in our material, this is now a custom primitive data doodad. We can set this at, you know, any primitive data index, as long as it doesn't overlap with other ones. We're just going to set it at 0 for now. We go up to our character, we activate it, and you can see that the effect is fading in over time by just using the custom data on the mesh rather than using a parameter in the material instance, dynamic, blah, blah, blah. So again, a nice little way that you can use custom data to affect things like this. One other thing that I wanted to explain is how you can sort of use this system with instanced meshes. Essentially what we're going to be doing is applying this overlay material to the static mesh instance, so like all of them at once. And then we're going to be using per instance custom data to actually change the opacity on, you know, an individual instanced object. And you also have to get the, you know, the index of the instance that was hit from the the line trace or the hit event or whatever. So if we have a look, we can, bam, put the effect on this one. Bam, we can put the effect on this one. We can put it on that one. We can put it on that one. And these are all instanced meshes. And in the material, this is what it would look like. Parents and custom data, data index 0, default value 0. And we're just switching this to 1 when we hit the instance. Now, let's look at a couple of creative limitations. If you're using any kind of world position offset on the mesh, like underneath the overlay, and let's say we just wanted to like balloon our character out a bit by like 5 units or something, and we put that into the world position offset, and you can see now that the overlay effect is now underneath the character because this is, you know, in the shader. If you're using world position offset for like some wind effects or like body transform stuff or damage or whatever, then this is something that you'll have to actually factor in to the overlay materials. So in this case, let's just copy paste this. Might be more complex. It might have all the wind effects and the body transforms and the whatever. We would just need to put that in the overlay material and then add that to whatever the overlay material's effect is. Now it matches up with our character. Now you can see here that it's broken, or at least it's too exaggerated on all of the other meshes. And that's where you would have to, you know, kind of do some planning so that you had one for, you know, some meshes and one for others that use WPO. It would be really cool if somehow the shader could read the world position offset from the first shader in like a stack somehow. But that would kind of require some runtime compilation bullshit. So we just did a little bit of testing / profiling, whatever you want to call it, with these overlay materials. I've got 800 crates in this scene. And as you guys might know, Unreal does some automatic instancing of meshes that are all the same mesh using the same material. And the conclusion that we have come to is that these overlay materials only add 1 extra draw call, so they don't actually break the instancing of the object. You can see here we've got 188/9 draw calls, and if I grab this crate, we add just a random material over the top of it, go back in, turn that off, wait for it to kind of sort its shit out. Now we've got 189/190 draw calls. Therefore, if having the overlay material, you know, broke the instancing, we would expect 3 extra draw calls. 1 for the crate mesh, 1 for the you know, the wood material, and then 1 for the overlay. So this is pretty good knowledge to know that it doesn't completely break auto instancing. And the other thing is, if we got all of these crates, all 800 crates, and we went to their overlay material and we set it to be, you know, that debuff material that we had earlier, then once this calms down, we can deduce that the overlay material itself can be instanced together because we have 160 draw calls. So again, right now the mesh and the wood, the wood material and the debuff overlay material are all getting instanced into, you know, one batch. So thumbs up. That's fantastic. Now, I do have some good and bad news. If you are one of those sickos that uses meshes with, you know, a million different material slots. So with the material overlay system, you only have to apply this once and it will apply to, you know, the entire mesh. However, it will require 1 draw call for each slot on the mesh. So this mesh has like 17 different material slots, and you can see that we've got 87 draws in total. That's, you know, with everything on the screen. And then if I get rid of the overlay material, then we have 67 drawers. So that's going to wrap it up for today's video. I hope that you've learned something new about the material overlay system, how it can be used, why we're going to use it, when not to use it. We now know, about its properties with auto instancing and how to kind of apply it to instance meshes and all that good stuff. If you do have any questions about this system, feel free to join our Discord, the Prismatic Dev Learning Hub, which is linked in the description. And if you do want to support the continuation of this channel monetarily, you can do so for as little as $1 per month in the Patreon, which is linked in the description. So I guess with that, we say goodbye. Goodbye.